Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to the second part of our discussion about the union of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam with Aisha radiallahu anha, and some issues regarding that. And before we continue with what we were going through, perhaps it makes sense for us to do a bit of a recap and for me to ask everyone here to summarize some of the arguments. Now, we discussed a particular verse in the Bible, the Old Testament. Who remembers what verse it was and what the contents of that verse? Mahdi, do you remember the contents of that verse? Okay, Ali Dawah to the rescue here.
I just know the numbers. I don't know the verse. So if someone can help me with the verse. Yeah, Numbers 31, 18. I just remembered all of a sudden.
What does it say in that verse?
That basically when you go, well, in a paraphrasing, when you go to a specific nation to war and you kill the men, you keep the women that are untouched, by the way. So not all of them, the ones that are virgins for yourselves.
Okay, and is it women or is it something else that was mentioned?
Sorry? Kill the men and keep the women who have been untouched for yourselves.
Okay, that might be one translation, but what was the word? Do you remember? Does anyone? Yes, that's beautiful. The Hebrew word, Tariq, what was that again? Taf. Yeah, and what does that mean? When we look at the lexicons and the word taf, what does it mean actually? What do we say? Yeah, young girls, and
some say 3-year-old, right? Some rabbis.
I mean, that's different now, but we'll just focus one thing at a time. This question of what is taf, or what is it in the what other translations do we have of it? Yes, young girls. Okay, good. So what does this show us? Oh. Go ahead, Furqan.
So it shows that even in the Old Testament there's some it was allowed for the Jews to marry, in this case, little girls.
Okay, and so good, thank you very much. Now if I've come back and said, okay, you're speaking to a Christian now, and the Christian turns back Shakar and says, look, I mean, that was the Old Testament. Now we have the New Testament. Why, you know, we believe that Jesus died on the cross and all these things in the Old Testament we don't really accept. So how would you accept it? How would you answer that?
So, okay, but did God command it in the Old Testament?
So yeah, he did in the Old Testament.
Okay, so that means that it's not wrong in all times, all places, all situations.
Yeah, just like, you know, for example, you guys believe in Adam and Eve, their offspring had probably committed incest.
Yeah, no problem. We're in agreement then.
Okay, so but the difference between me and you would be that we believe that you know, Jesus Christ came and we don't longer have these laws. You guys believe that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was a guide for all times and all places.
Yeah,
yeah. So for you, it's still applicable. You can still follow him. You can still follow the Prophet here.
Yeah.
What we're saying is that was
absolutely
right now. For example, like as a Christian, let's say, as a Christian, I would say, just as you believe that incest is done, or had been done by the offspring of Adam, alayhi salam, and that was applicable at that time in that place. We believe that there's an applicability of this particular ruling, you know, of taking the young girls for yourself. No problem, we accept for the sake of argument. Difference being between us and you is that you believe that this is continual to our times.
What's the problem?
This is the argument we're putting forward, that this is no longer applicable. We're saying that some moralities, you know, are applicable. Sometimes they're not applicable other times.
Yeah, that's fine. So then you're basically
in all cases. I'm not trying to like just be like pedantic. I genuinely don't understand the point. In all situations, we're talking circumstantially here. So the discussion will have to become about what analyses we're using, how we're analysing the circumstances to allow things or not allow things. But it sounds like we're in agreement that there is a circumstantial consideration here.
As a Christian, what I'm saying is, for example, that after Jesus come and died on the cross. Okay, and
did morality become absolute when he died on the cross?
What I'm saying is that when Jesus come, these Old Testament injunctions are no longer applicable.
No problem, but
you believe that Prophet Muhammad, whatever he's done,
yes,
you know, is still applicable. This is the difference between me and you. This
Yes.
is why Christianity is a religion which is adaptable, and it's a, you know, and you guys need to reform your religion. Actually, that's why you need to reform your religion.
Well, where's the disagreement? Wallahi, I don't understand. Where's the disagreement?
So it's basically saying that
Go on,
basically.
Ali, come in.
Yeah, no. So it's
Right,
basically
then
saying.
refutation will be done on you. Remember the last time you helped somebody in the fight?
Yeah.
Yeah, go
Which
ahead.
one? Happened many times.
Yeah.
So basically, what they're saying is that with us, the process, and with them, with the Christians, basically, they have now the new law. Jesus died for their sins. They don't need to follow the old law. Whereas with you Muslims, you have to follow your Prophet Muhammad till this day, meaning you can marry a 6-year-old. So they're saying
Okay, so he didn't say that though. I
he was
wanted
saying
him
in different words, yeah. But
look, I wanted to, like, if that's you didn't say that. I wanted you to say that. So you
Okay.
didn't say that.
Let me make it very
Because
explicit.
now the devil's in the
He's
details.
not-
Wallahi.
He's not brave enough
Fine,
to
That's what I'm
say that.
saying.
let's say so for you guys, you'd still believe that marrying a 6-year-old and consummating the marriage of a 9-year-old is a morally acceptable thing to do in the 21st century, for example. Whereas you would say, you know, mentioning or citing Old Testament laws
Yeah.
to try and state the Christian position today,
Yeah.
would be something which would be completely unnecessary, or in fact inappropriate.
Simply,
Mm.
in Islam, you're allowed to marry an adult if it's not going to cause harm to that individual.
Okay, but why
What's
do
the
we start
problem?
talking about harm here? We're talking about
Because that's what we're factoring in this in the circumstantial analysis.
Why?
Because it's based on that. There's usuli principles and all these things. That you know.
I don't know
all
about
these things.
Usul. I'm a Christian.
You know these things. But that's what we're explaining. Do you get it? So that's what
understand,
you're going to
I
explain this.
Let me push Ali for a little bit, because
Can
these are the things you're gonna
Can I just-
encounter.
Yeah,
It's good. You've done good.
yeah.
I know. So today we're pushing everyone today, yeah, because this is the kind of thing you're definitely gonna face.
Because
yeah?
you know what I'm saying, like from my
Yeah,
standpoint,
yeah.
If you're not going to be very clear that I have a problem with the fact that it's 6, I don't just kind of want to give that to you. You know what I'm saying? If
You done well, but there was a few things you missed out. Because here's what I would say.
Yeah.
When we kind of went through this last time, but this is very important that you follow the method of this. Because if you follow the method of it, you're going to trap the guy. You will trap the guy. Yeah. If you remember last time, in last week's discussion, we said something, two or three things which are very important. First thing, you don't trap somebody by making a point. You trap someone by asking a question. Yeah. Just remember this point. You can never trap anybody by making a point. You don't see, like, for example, the interrogatee in the police station, and he's sitting down, and then the investigator comes in, and then the investigator starts No, he's asking questions, and to a point where this interrogated one now, he's gonna start feeling trapped. The first question, who remembers on this point? Yes.
Can I just see if I've understood it correctly?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, so let's start again.
Okay, but before you do start, I
Okay.
want to get you. Let's get the template right.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I'm trying to see if I've understood.
But do you remember the first question that we have to ask?
Yeah, so is it
deontologically wrong or consequentially wrong?
Don't use the word deontological, because most people won't understand
so
it.
basically, is it categorically wrong or consequentially wrong?
Good.
So now, once we agree that it's not
So
categorically
let's
wrong.
do it now, since you know the question.
Okay, yeah, good.
Okay, fine. So I'm coming in now. So same question.
Okay, so
So you as Christians, we believe, yes, that when Jesus Christ came,
yeah,
you know, he died for our sins.
okay,
Okay, and he was crucified,
okay,
resurrected on the third day,
yeah,
and so on. Okay, and so we don't actually, when you cite Old Testament material,
yeah,
for us that's not applicable,
okay,
because Jesus died for our sins, and we believe in the new covenant now.
okay,
Okay, so that's the difference between us and you, because what we're saying is that this morality is no longer applicable. You guys believe in a prophet who married you know, a young girl at the age of 6, and then he consummated at the age of 9.
Okay,
So that's the difference between us and you.
So okay, so firstly, that we agree that was it categorically wrong? You would disagree? It's not categorically wrong because at one time the God of the Old Testament allowed it, right?
So what are you asking here?
I'm asking very simple. Do you
Yeah.
believe it's categorically wrong or consequentially wrong?
What was exactly?
For example, that in the book of Numbers.
Yeah.
Yes. So do you believe at one moment in time God allowed that to happen?
Yeah, at one point in time.
So did you have a problem with that? At
no.
one moment of time.
At one point in time,
So it means that you don't believe it's categorically wrong. Okay, good.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
now you have to agree that
it has to be consequentially wrong.
it has to be. So then
Yeah.
we're both on the same page.
Good.
Because what that means is for time and place, due to bear in mind the consequences, it changes. So
No,
just
but we know the consequences will be very traumatic for a young person.
okay, good. No, what we're
Yeah.
trying to say is this: as you are consequentially,
Well, are you justifying? Are
Yeah,
you justifying a
yeah.
child being?
yeah, if you stop talking, let me talk. Yeah, okay.
Are you justifying a child?
If you just shut up for a second. Please. Okay, so since you believe it's consequentially wrong, we are at the same page with you guys, because you're saying at that moment of time that was not that God ordered that to happen, and it was right at that time, and we're saying the same thing. So we're not saying that the Prophet Muhammad marrying Aisha at 6 is categorically going to take place in every moment of time. At this time, it's consequentially we look at the consequences. So am I on the right track?
Okay, but what I'm saying, the consequences must have been very dire, very traumatic for a young girl.
But again, the fact that you
would you accept?
The fact
would you allow your
no.
Would you allow your 9-year-old?
No.
Would you be proud of that, Ali Dawah?
Yeah. Yeah. So what we're saying is that in that specific instance, that if you believe that, we're on the same page. We both believe that God commanded something to happen in that specific instance for that time. So that means in today's time, just as you believe Jesus came and died for the sins of the world, and it's a whole different paradigm, we follow the same principles.
See, it's good that I'm liking the fact that you're cool-headed, because this is the kind of behavior that they would exhibit, right?
Yeah, because they want you to get angry.
Yes, but I like that there was now. You've done almost everything right.
But are we on the same?
You're on the right
Okay,
page.
all right, okay.
The first good thing is you asked a question, and I had 2 answers,
Yeah.
and I was forced into one of them.
Yes.
Then you ran with that. It's like now since it's the World Cup, you passed it, and there's a through ball now.
Yeah.
So you're running up the pitch.
Yeah.
I like it, but we need now to get to the
good.
the penalty box. Now,
Yes.
when they go through the consequence, remember we said there's 2 options.
Yeah.
They can either say consequentially wrong or categorically wrong.
Yeah.
If they go with the consequentially wrong option, what do we need to outline?
That it's not in all times and all places it's wrong.
No, but before we even talk about that, Mahdi.
Well, they need to prove that Aisha radiallahu anha was harmed.
Beautiful. So before that, we need to establish what consequence are we talking about.
Okay.
So you ask them what consequence, what negative consequence, for example, are you talking about? So now they're going to say what?
Age. Harm.
Harm. So the moment they use the word harm, the burden of proof shifts
On them.
on them.
Yes.
Because now I am clearly making a claim. I'm saying that this marriage or this union between the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and Aisha at the age of 9, it caused harm. Now you can break that down. What kind of harm? Psychological harm, physical harm, societal harm, whatever, sociological, whatever harm you want to bring to the table. Now I have to bring evidence. Now I've become, if it's a biological case I'm making, then we're going to start exchanging scientific information. If it's a psychological case I'm making, then that's where the fight is.
Okay.
You see, but so you're on the right tracks. I think you have to get used to asking questions.
Okay.
Be fine, be comfortable asking them questions. Because when you ask them questions and they agree, you've taken the ball one step further to the penalty box. You're about to score the goal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So one more time. Let's do this one more time.
Okay. So.
Okay. So let's start again.
Okay.
Let's start again.
So yeah, basically.
So this time,
yeah,
we're gonna start with Mehdi, and then you're gonna jump in. Yeah. Go ahead. So Mehdi.
Yes.
And you have an advantage, I must say, because you've had 2 people already before you, okay? And we've done a lot of things. But so the difference between us and you, as Christians, is that we're saying that, Numbers 31:18, that was something. Yes, I agree. If it was to be implemented today, it would be abhorrent. It was absolutely abhorrent. But that's why Jesus came, the second covenant, and he was crucified for us. We don't have to think about the Old Testament laws. The difference between us and you is that you believe that the Prophet Muhammad is continually a role model for you, and that his behavior was justified.
So are you basing this on as a categorical thing, or is it based on consequences?
What do you mean exactly? I don't understand your
So you're saying, for example, the age of consent, or when you can have intercourse with someone.
Yes.
Is it a categorical thing? Like, is this age that you can have sex with someone, or is it based on consequences?
I think
But how do you define the age of consent?
I think you can make a case for either. I'm not talking about that.
I am actually. So, but what is the age of consent?
Yes,
how do you define?
I did that on purpose. You see?
How do you define the?
I like that.
How do you define the age of consent?
Okay, good. I mean, look, you could make a case for consequences. You could make a case for consequences. Why not?
I mean, if you look in the world now, some countries is 14, some is 15, Japan is 13.
Yeah.
So, how are you measuring this?
Well, it's when the child is, or when the person becomes adolescent,
okay, we agree.
Physically mature.
Yeah, we agree.
So,
Aisha radiallahu anha.
Yeah.
So we follow the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
Yeah.
So he married Aisha radiallahu anha when she was an adult.
Yeah.
Yes. And
why
that's
are
what
you
we
saying?
follow.
Well, how do we know she's an adult? How can you prove that she's an adult?
Do you have a plethora of evidence?
What's the evidence?
I mean, just look at the literature, right?
Okay, so you're
Yeah.
saying, but she has to be an adult.
For anyone to get married or have intercourse with someone of opposite sex in Islam, there can't be any harm that's caused between partners. So are you saying there was harm between them?
Yeah, 100%. Imagine if you have a 9-year-old daughter and she was engaging in sex. You're telling me there would be no harm?
Well, there's a fallacy of presentism here. So,
Yeah.
I asked the same question again.
Yeah, go on.
So how can you prove that there was harm in this marriage?
I can prove it by saying that if any 9-year-old today, year 5,
But you're
year
saying
6,
today, right?
Yes.
We're not talking about today.
Exactly. Assumption.
Okay. Your
So
prophet, you're not allowed to do this now. would you
No,
say?
but it's not based on the age, a specific age.
Mm.
It's based on the harm.
Okay, beautiful. Okay, see, this is
Yeah.
good. You see, this is the kind of question you're going to get. Isn't it true, Ali? This is the kind of question. You've done this a lot, this one, right?
You're polite, but you're gonna get worse.
You're going to get worse. But this one, they're going to come swinging because they think they got the golden bullet.
Yeah.
They're going to come straight for it. And they're going to be rude. They're going to cut you off. Yeah, and this across the board. However, whatever their level, this is their what they believe is the golden bullet for them. All right. I think we get it. You ask them a question. Get them to answer the question. Move on to the next thing. Ask them question again. What kind of harm is it? What kind of get them push the board. The more you push the burden of proof on them and ask them, get them to answer questions, the more you're in charge. By speaking a lot, it actually shows you're anxious.
Yeah, well, that's so true.
If you speak a lot, you're speaking a lot, especially with this kind of thing.
Yeah.
You're not in control. So, someone who speaks a lot is anxious. Okay. Now, today, inshallah, we're going to ask what is a child? This question. I guess we ended with it. And this is in a book called The Disappearance of Childhood. I'm going to read this out. In fact, has anyone got this in front of them? Maybe someone else should read them out.
I can, but how do I find? Where is it?
Have you got the slides?
Is it in the group?
Yeah.
Okay, one second. Let's see. Which let's see. In an oral world, there is not much of a concept of an adult, and therefore even less of a child. And that is why, in all sources, one finds that in the Middle Ages, childhood ended at age 7. Why 7? Because this is the age at which children have command over speech. They can say and understand what adults can say and understand. They are able to know all the secrets of the tongue, which are the only secrets that they need to know. And this helps us to explain why the Catholic Church designated age 7 as the age at which one was assumed to know the difference between right and wrong, the age of reason, the right and wrong and the age of reason. It also helps us to explain why, until the 17th century, the word used to denote young males could refer to men of 30, 40 or 50, for there was no word in French, German or in English for a young male between the ages of 7 and 16. The word child expressed kinship, not an age, but most of all, the oralism of Middle Ages helps us explain why there were no primary
schools. It should be primary schools.
Okay, that's all I can see.
So let me continue.
Yeah.
For where biology determines communication competence, there is no need for such schools. The medieval way of learning is the way of the oralist. It occurs essentially through apprenticeship and service, what we would call on-the-job training. Such schools, as existed, were characterized by a lack of gradation in the curricula according to the difficulty of the subject matter, the simultaneity with which subjects were taught, the mixing of the ages, and the liberty of the pupils. If a medieval child got to school, he would have begun as late as age 10, probably later. He would have lived on his own lodgings in the town, far from his family. It would have been common for him to find his class adults of all ages, and he would not have perceived himself as different from them. He certainly would not have found any correspondence between the ages of students and what they studied. I think this is very powerful, actually, quotation. Can we take a break for about 5 minutes? You talk to the person next to you about this quotation, take 2 or 3 bullet points, and then we'll present exactly what Postman's trying to say here in this quotation. Yeah, we'll have a quick break. Okay, let's quickly we've just read something, and it had a lot in there, so let's quickly summarize some of the points in there. So Tariq, what are some of the points which you have come out in that particular quotation?
Sure, but basically they're defining it as when the child, when their childhood is over, once they get command over speech, so they can understand what's going on around them. Also, that they can define, they have capability to understand reason, the right and wrong. So that's another factor that they're using.
What about that particular quotation, Tariq, would you say is, what institution did they reference, and why is that important?
It's the Catholic Church.
Okay, that's one institution. That's good. Yeah,
they reference the Catholic Church, and their particular definition is the age of 7.
Okay.
Right?
How could we use that, for example?
Well, we can throw it back at them because they're questioning our values, and we can just say that your main, numeric main body of Christians is the Catholics, and this is their definition, which is lower than our definition. Technically.
It's a really good point. In that quotation as well, there's reference to schools. We need to think about this together, right? So it says this: the word child expressed kinship, not an age. But most of all, the oralism of the Middle Ages helps us explain why there is no primary schools, for where biology determines communication competence, there is no need for such schools. The medieval way of learning is the way of the oralist. It occurs essentially through apprenticeship and service, what we would call on-the-job training. Such schools as existed were characterized by a lack of gradation in the curricula, according to the difficulty of the subject matter, the simultaneity with which subjects were taught, and the mixing of ages, and the liberty of the pupils. If a medieval child goes to school, he would have begun as late as age 10, probably later. He would have lived on his own lodgings in the town, far from his family. It would have been common for him to find his class adults of all ages, and he would not have perceived himself as differently from them. He certainly would not have found any correspondence between the ages of students and where they studied. So going back to Tariq and Mahdi, what in particular, let me put the question very clearly. When we talk about the medieval times, we're talking about 1,000 years worth of history here, maybe from about 400 to about 1,400 before the Renaissance. Okay. What in particular would you say are the main differences that we have relating to schools in the medieval times, according to this, from what we have today?
So in the medieval times it was more like work-based.
Okay.
So it's more necessarily based on, you're in this grade at this age. It's more based on capability. So it's like, you could also relate to, like, in the modern world, it's all just like numbers. You reach this certain age and you do this certain thing. But here it's more based on your capability, your ability to cognize and stuff.
Okay.
So it's not even discriminatory to age, it's just on ability, I'd say.
Okay, that's a good point. So there's about competence, about ability. What would you add to that, Tariq?
There's that they, in the Middle Ages, the children they would be classed as adults, and they could live independently on their own, and they could interact as adults with their surroundings.
So this point here, I think, is a very important point, what you just said here. So look, how we determine what a child is, historically and contemporaneously. One of the things that we use is schools. And there's a connotation here. When you think of a child, you think of schools. I mean, these two things, it's almost inconceivable that you can imagine a primary school adult. It's almost like a juxtaposition or some kind of oxymoron. What kind of primary school adult are you talking about? Anyone in primary school is a child by definition. But what's being said here is something which is paradigm shifting, in the sense that it's telling us in history it wasn't like that. What we consider today to be children in primary schools, yesterday were adults in lodgings that would have had an independent life, that if they went to schools they would have seen no difference between themselves and, say, a 30-year-old or a 25-year-old. They would have considered themselves to be co-equal, in a sense, to that individual or to that particular people. Which brings us to, I think, a very important part of this discussion. When we consider when the ages of consent changed in the world, because if you look at America, you look at the States in America, you look at the United Kingdom, you look at Canada, you look at Scotland, you look at all these things, all these places. Even if you look at some of the colonized places like India, which by the way was first to change the ages of consent, even before the United Kingdom, you'll find that the ages of consent, they changed by and large after the World War. The First World War, that is. When did the First World War take place?
1914?
1914 to 1918, okay? That's the First World War. The Second World War was from 1939 to 1945. Okay, these are two, probably the most significant historical events in the 20th century, so everyone should know these dates. So we're talking about 1914 to 1918, and then 1939 to 1945. World War One, World War Two. World War One, you had who was fighting who? Do you remember? Just for the trivia of it, who was fighting who? Huh? Who was on whose side?
One side was Germany and Ottomans against
the Ottoman Empire, yes.
French, British, and eventually the Russians.
Okay, so
Americans, sorry, as well.
Well, America. We're
Later
talking
on.
more about the World War II here now. You know, when we
But
get into.
did he help in the first one?
Yeah. But so the Ottoman Empire, you mentioned it. When did it break up? Do you know?
You want a year?
1924. Yeah, 1924. That's 5 years after the, or 5 or 6 years after the World War One.
7.
Is it 7?
If
1918.
If you finished.
1924.
24, 25.
1924.
6. Yeah.
So that's 6 years. So we're talking about, that was a significant event. But when World War One took place, what did this do to the infrastructure in Europe? It destroyed the infrastructure in Europe. So there were new policies that liberal governments, or governments in Europe, decided to enact. And some of these policies included educational policies. Don't forget, first wave feminism was alive and well at this time. When did the women get the vote in the UK?
1918.
In the UK, 1918. I think Canada was the first one of the Western countries to have it. It might have been 1917, and then 1918, the United States of America, and then I think 1919, the United Kingdom. But I can double check this, yeah? 1917, 18, 19. Okay, after this, by the way, when the United Kingdom, when the women's enfranchisement, when female enfranchisement took place and women had the vote, it wasn't all women. It was women until a certain age. Women above the age of 35. It was only until 1928 where the was 18 and over. 1928. So that's less than 100 years ago. If you think about it, it's quite shocking actually. You know, 1928, women aged 18 and over. And the same year, there was something called the Marriage Act. The same year. Because the campaigning of the first wave feminist movement, in addition to the liberal government, because it was not called the Liberal Democrats at that time, it was called the Liberal Party. Okay, the Liberal government decided to do some educational reforms. So two things were happening at the same time. You had protest movements and so on. You had Reformation, and they needed a new educational program. Now, from the extract we've just read, we said that childhood has always been connected to matters of what? Schooling. Yeah, schooling. We just read, you know. Okay. So now, when you extend the age of two things, consent and the amount of time that it would take for someone to finish school, you've redefined what it means to be a child. Childhood is clearly a social construct. And this is what we were talking about in the break when we said that what is a woman has never been a question of great controversy in the history of the world. But what is a child has been. And it's so ironic that one of them is a controversy and one of them isn't. Because childhood is something clearly left to a great deal of subjectivity. It's not fully subjective, but there is a great deal of subjectivity. Because this is a historical fact. When we talk about the fact that in the Middle Ages, you know, these particular people were seen as children, or adults, which we'd consider today to be children, and today it's not that case. The point is, at what point do we call this individual, autonomous adult, and at what point do we not? There has to be some level. If you say 16, it can't be just 16. That cannot be the answer.
And 16 where?
Yeah, it cannot.
16 where?
Exactly.
Like France has dropped it to 15.
Exactly.
Now.
So the point is that definitions of child have clearly changed, and they've been connected to childhood and legal change. Which is why you'll find, if you look at all these pieces of law, you'll find that, you know, in Delaware, in Scotland, in England, you know, the age of marriage was 7, and then when the Marriage Act happened, it became 12. It was, you know, and then we moved from 12 to 16. Yeah, it's 12 up until 1928. It's a serious matter. Okay, so already now there seems to be an issue with definitions. When they come to you and say, your Prophet married a child, say, what do you mean by child? Honestly, what do you mean by it? What is a child? A child is a 16-year-old? A child is a 14-year-old? A child is what exactly? Really? It's a real problem here. You know? Now, biological realities. So I've got some interesting journals from Jessa Gamble, Puberty Early Starters. I'm just read it. This is actually Nature. This is the top. I think this is the top. No, yes, it's probably the top, you know, peer-reviewed scientific journal. I'm reading it from it. Let me read it. For the first time in our evolutionary history, biological puberty in females significantly precedes, rather than being matched to, the age of successful function as an adult. This mismatch between the age of biological and psychosocial maturation constitutes a fundamental issue of modern society. Our social structures have been developed in the expectation of longer childhood, prolonged education and training, and later reproductive competence. This emerging mismatch creates fundamental pressures on contemporary adolescents and how they live in society. What's she saying here, Shakir? Can you explain it to me?
Tell her, Shakir.
Did you read it?
Shakir, stop smiling.
No,
Shakir, come on.
Huh?
You chilling on Shakir?
No.
Do you want me to read it again?
I'm going to ask my other
That's what I was thinking about.
What do you think is being communicated here?
Basically, what it's saying is that because of this, you could say, artificial prolongation of childhood that took place, as you're mentioning, in the early 20th century, now you have a situation where basically people are beginning to get involved in relationships and eventually reproducing later than their biology would indicate, because they become mature, they develop the means to...
Beautiful. I think that's a good summary. I like that. But I want you to... Let's focus again on the wording here. This is very interesting. She's saying, for the first time... So this is something interesting. For the first time in our evolutionary history, biological puberty in females significantly precedes, rather than being matched to the age of successful functioning as an adult. This mismatch, okay, between the age of biological and psychosocial maturation. So you've got two things going on. There's biological maturation and you have psychosocial maturation. Psychology, social, society, sociology, yeah? They're saying there's a mismatch here. We are elongating, yes? We are elongating one at the expense of the other, for example. Or one is happening before the other. There is not, it's not happening in tandem with one another. They're not in sync.
So you're saying psychologically and socially, they are it's taking longer for them to mature compared to biologically.
What we're saying is that society now
Yeah.
doesn't treat adults at a certain age as adults.
Okay.
Biological adults, for example, the expectation of a 13-year-old, let's say, who is more than willing or more than capable, let's say a 13, 14-year-old, more than capable of reproducing, more than capable of engaging in sex, more than capable, and enjoying it and having no problem with it, and all of these things. And I mean, all of these things. No, honestly, Yani, this individual is seen as a child. Seen as a child. Seen as a child. In fact, they will be treated as such. This emerging mismatch, she says, this emerging mismatch creates fundamental pressures on contemporary adolescents and how they live in society. This is in science, this is in nature. No, it's not a religious fundamentalist saying this thing. This is an atheist woman, feminist. Interestingly, Imam Shafi'i, he said this. I'm going back to biological reality. He says, I saw many women in Yemen at the age of 9 reaching the age of puberty. Look what he called them. He called them women. This is quite interesting. A Shafi'i, yes. When did he die, if anyone knows?
241. No,
that's Imam Ahmad.
204.
204.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah, 204 sounds about right. So what, 36 years before Ahmad. So this is 3rd century after Hijrah. Yeah? We're talking about 1,200 years ago. He calls them women. Does he? Oh, someone will look at that and say, how can you call a 9-year-old women? How could you not? Everyone was doing that. Just because today there have been some changes in history and law that's 90 years old as some grandparents that live in London. These changes are as old as people. Living human beings that would have remembered their mothers being betrothed and married and all of these things at a very much younger age. Just because these changes have taken place. Isn't it amazing how society has changed in line with that? It's shocking. It is actually, to me, it's shocking how, you know, a culture can emerge from. This is the best example of a social construct I can imagine. They've socially constructed it. This is a social construct. And I can't imagine a social construct as big as this. The left wing haven't said anything about it. Well, they say a few things here and there, but why not? This is a social construct. This is a social construct. What it means to be a child in the United Kingdom or any other country with arbitrary numbers of consent is socially constructed from 90 years. Is. According to what? According to the biological markers, according to the historical reality, according to the legalistic framework. When you think over all of it together, it's a social construct. Now, when you bring a social construct to us and say you have to conform to it, why do we have to do that? I mean, this is really, it's very odd, actually. Considering also that the Roman Empire, the average life expectancy was 35 to 40. Amram Tropper says the following, his historian. He says, most women would have married sufficiently late that we would no longer consider them to have been children. Yet many women, particularly in Babylonia, married so young that today we would consider them to have been girls, not women. The goal of maximizing fertility in particular must have lowered the age at first marriage, and the price of this goal is early. We might say premature end of girlhood. For many girls, adolescence was not a time for fun, education, experimentation, or professional training. Rather, it was a time when one was already expected to assume the full responsibilities of a mature woman as wife and mother. The thing is, like, it's pretty commonsensical here. When you have a shorter life expectancy, then you have to do what you have to do quicker. Like, imagine, even in the world that we live in now, You go to sub-Saharan Africa, Sierra Leone or something, country like this. See what is the average life expectancy? 65 or something, I don't know what it is. It's considerably lower than a place like the aging populations like Germany and Italy, which 26% of the population is over 65 years old. 26% of it. Why? Because whatever reason, the medical care, because of diets, because of whatever reason. But the point is, even in the world that we're living in today, there's significant differences between average life expectancies from one country to another. So imagine now if we're going 500 years back, 1,000 years back. There's no such thing as a hospital, even in fact. What do you think the average life expectancy in the world would have been in sub-Saharan Africa and Asia and Middle East 1,000 years ago? 60, 70, maybe. This would be a good age to die, maybe, at that age. But then if that's the case, if you're going to die at that kind of age, 60, 70, then why are you going to get married at the age of 45 or 41? Or the average age of marriage in this country is 30-something. For a woman, it's 33. For a man, it could be 36. The average age of marriage is 33 here. At that time, you could be a grandmother. And you don't have time to play games like this. You might die, you might get some disease, you might contract something. You need to propagate your genes. You need to have a progeny. So this is the ridiculousness of comparing two time periods. Even on a very basic human geography level. Like we know that their life expectancies are completely different. So when a woman is capable of getting married, she's not going to go to university and get a career. And people have these crazy images. Because right now, if you close your eyes and I say, imagine a child. You already imagine, do you know what I imagine? I don't imagine any child. I imagine a primary school. That's what I imagine. If you tell me, imagine a child, I imagine some kids playing on the slides in a primary school. That's what I imagine. The same child, if you put him in Sparta and Athens, he already knows how to destroy all of us. With the weapons and the swords and killing and all these things. Because there was no time to play games. Just because we're living in an age where there is time to play games. You can play games for 18 years. Can you imagine? 18 years. And before that would have been, the child's already done huge things in their life. Become an adult, everything, done everything. Yeah, that's the beginning of it. Why would they waste their years? Think about it.
Some of them are conquered.
If you go to certain areas of the world, all you have to do is travel. If you go to certain areas of the world, you'll see children living completely independent, what we consider to be children, living completely independent lives. We're going to the village, getting the water, we're going there, selling tissues on the streets. The Western mindset has distorted our reality. It is a social construct. Uqsum billah, once I was working as a teacher. And there was year 8 class. And a particular young man, I said to some of the teachers, I said, this is not a 13-year-old. And they told me off in the staff room. I remember this is like yesterday. I said, please don't say that again, you know. This, honestly, it's seen as disrespectful. And the boy was from Nigeria. Now, the boy was from Nigeria. I already know what that means. He's got Nigerian papers. That's the truth. They said, listen, they're almost accusing me of racism. Let's just put it that way. Almost accused me of racism. The boy, broad shoulders. The boy, broad shoulders, strong jaw. He would walk around the playground with 2 girls in his hands. Year 8s. Yeah, no problem. And you can see the stubble in his head, like here. I said, this? I said, yeah. I always pat him in the back and say, whatever, After I left the school, it emerged. My friend, wallahi, he said to me, call me, he said, you know that guy, such and such person? He was a 22-year-old man from Nigeria. He was a 22, we discovered, the embassy called, they did this and that, 22 years old. But because the social construct is so strong, it overrided what they saw in front of them. You saw a man. This is a man. Wallahi, that boy, that man, he would probably beat up most of the teachers in the school. And I saw him one time having a fight, and he was destroying the opponent, throwing him on the floor. I was like, come on, man. Hey, you know that you're 22 years old. This guy's 13. Do you know what I'm trying to say? And those kids, those little boys, they had no chance. You know, this is the truth. Wallahi. He might have been 19, 20. I can't remember exactly his age, but he was definitely like an adult, yeah? And it was discovered and he left, and it was a scandal. And I even called the Guardian. I said, I've got a story for you. And wallahi, because I thought, you know, I left the school, maybe I'll make a few bucks from this. And I said, what kind of money are you going to offer me? They said, we can't really offer you money. I said, I'll put the phone down. I said, forget it. I said, forget this, man. I'm not going to go into the office and this and that and tell you whatever. But the point is this, the social construct is so strong that you will deny the image that you see in front of you. You'll accuse someone of racism, of ageism, of whatever ism. But you don't, you see this is a human adult with stubble on his face and big chest and big arms. Looks like he's coming out of the gym. This is ridiculous. This is ridiculous. And I don't want to go further. But there are, I will go further. I'll go further off camera. No, but you can give examples of, you know, people at the age of 14, what they look like. You know, what the age of 14, 13, what they look like. And you're telling me they're a child? Yeah, no way you're a child, mate. No way you're a child. Sorry to say. Historical realities extended. So Mary Lewis, she says the following about what I've just said. She goes, no matter what period we are examining, childhood is more than a biological age, but a series of social and cultural events and experiences that make up a child's life. The time at which these transitions take place varies from one culture to another and has a bearing on the level of interaction children have with their environment, their exposure to disease and trauma, and their contribution to the economic status of their family and society. The Western view of childhood, where children do not commit violence and are asexual, has been challenged by studies of children that show them learning to use weapons or being depicted in sexual poses. What is clear is that we cannot simply transpose our view of childhood directly onto the past. It says everything we want to say, really. And this is really all there is to be said. I mean, there's no argument here to be made. You know, they say, oh, your prophet married a child. They say, look, you haven't even decided what a child is. It's a social construct, your definition is. So that's what it is. You know? And clearly, our religion, I would put this to them as well, is a religion which is clear in its essence that doesn't allow harm. Because one of the qawa'id, one of the principles of the religion of Islam is ad-dararu yuzal, which is that harm is to be averted. In fact, Ash-Shatibi, who wrote the Muwafaqat in the 8th century, he said that a principle in Islam, a qa'idah, it is more encroaching than an individual piece of evidence because it includes many evidences. So for example, this principle of harm is to be averted, it is composed of many different pieces of evidence. And so since this is a principle of Islam, the religion of Islam, the way that marriage is seen in the religious tradition is, as we started off by saying in the first session, something which, yes, societally, we must look at what the person is capable of. We're not going to take a child out of the primary school today and tell them to get married. Why? Because they have not been given the training that an 8th century or 9th century 8, 9, 10-year-old has been given. They have not been given the training, so it's unfair for them. And based on this principle, we wouldn't, transpose these ahkam on them. However, at the same time, if we're talking about the morality or lack thereof or something, it's unfair to use our standards today and transpose it on the past. And that is all we have to say about this matter. Is there something you want to add here? Yeah.
Yes, of course.
Yes.
In the Hindu religion,
yes,
the Krishna Krishna entity is mentioned as marrying a girl of 8 years old,
Really?
Rukmini, and this is in the Skanda Puran. So it's clearly mentioned the girl's age is 8 years old.
I think it's very good that you mentioned that, because we mentioned Judaism, we mentioned Christianity, now Hinduism as well. So we can summarize by saying, look, this is not outlawed in any major world system, whether it's religion or ideology, and all of history has seen it. And only because you have a social construct now that you wish to badger us with, you're making an argument. But that's not a good enough argument for us. They can't prove that their conceptions of childhood are not socially constructed. They cannot prove that, especially when they don't have a biological marker. Yeah, the thing is, the same, put it this way, especially for the whole culture wars discussion and the gender wars, yeah? If you were to ask someone from the alt-right or the right wing, what would be the arbiter for you to answer the question, what is a woman? You'd say science. You'd say biology. You'd say the XY chromosome. Okay. The same question, what is a child? What is the arbiter? Society? Now you've become left-wing all of a sudden. Now you've become a social constructionist. So if you're allowing it for childhood, why not allow it for gender? If you're allowing it for childhood, then you should allow it for gender. This is something where the left wing actually has, if they made the argument, would have very strong argument. I don't know why they don't make the argument. If Matt Walsh came to me and I was a left wing guy with purple hair, and he says, what is a woman? I say, what is a child? What is a child? That's why I say a woman is whatever, but what is a child? Because if you say a child is a 16-year-old, you say it's a 14, 15, whatever age you give it, you're not using science here, are you? And if you're not saying if it's not a 14, 15-year-old, what is it then? Give us some scientific parameters. The moment you give scientific parameters, you can have a 9-year-old child, adult. The moment you give scientific parameters, it opens the door to a 9-year-old adult. Finished. Done. Finished, actually. And this is how the left wing should actually reply. They should say, if I was a left wing guy, if I was a structuralist or social constructor, I would reply by saying, I'd say, look, the same way that you determine what a child is, we determine what a woman is. No difference. Or minimal difference. Society decides. Human beings decide. Individual expression, societal expression. So you don't like it? Well, how come you can have your cake and eat it both, Matt Walsh, or whoever it is? How can you have your cake and eat it both? You allow some sets of social constructions, but you deny others. If you want science to be the arbiter, you open the door to a 9-year-old adult. Finished. Done. And with that, we're finished as well. And I hope you have enjoyed this session as much as we have. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.